At this point, I would like to introduce you facts about early years growth, development, and learning, facts that are supported by scientific findings. And the first one I would like to introduce is that a newborn child's body and child's brain, they grow at a very rapid and intense rate. The brain produces enormous quantities of neurons and forms a complex neural network. And there is a finding that by the age of 3, the brain reaches about 90% of its adult age size. So due to the fast brain development and growth, children grow and develop very quickly in early years. But let's think, does this speed and does the intense rate of growth of brain mean the qualitative change? It may not be quite the match here. But what do we know about actually the qualitative change in brain that happens in early years, and how to address implications of quality change in the brain? So research, again, suggests that brain is actually like a muscle with a very high plasticity. Brain is more sensitive to certain particular types of learning at different stages of development. So here we could talk about sensitivity periods in early brain development. The sensitivity periods, they serve as windows, during which acquisition pattern for a particular skill is shaped and particular skill is acquired. You may ask, does it mean that people or children do not learn beyond the sensitivity periods? Of course, learning happens always. Learning happens through the whole life. What we want to emphasize here is that the sensitivity periods are the periods of life, of a child's life, that the child has the maximal potential to acquire certain skill or certain template for the skill for his future development. So it is, in a way, the time when the certain process is like launched or activated in the brain of a child. So it is very important to know this in order to understand why we need to provide stimulation for children already at the very early age, and why we should not underestimate their ability to learn. So let's have a look at one of the lines in the graph. I would take an example of, let's say, vision, which is a white line. So you see that the peak of the sensitive period is located between the period from birth to about 3 years. It means that this is the period when visual stimulation and the experiences and the exposure to visual experiences will actually serve best for the child. So the child is born with a very vague and very vague vision, with identifying just a few primary colors. So within this first stage, through 3 years of life, the child will really need visual stimulations to develop, to form, to shape, to get the skill of vision mature. Of course, sensitivity periods, as I said, they just are there to let us understand that learning happens at its best through this period. But even though the lines go down in functions like hearing and habitual ways of responding or emotional control, by the age of 4, it does not mean that we do not have to work on these areas anymore. This is just, again, to say that these are the most potential periods for certain functions to be set up in the brain of the child. In addition to sensitivity periods, you can look at the peaks of the line. They are called like critical periods. They are more finite in time. So they refer to the point when the external stimuli is absolutely compulsory for the development of a particular skill. But as you see, the black line for numbers, that is not probably the skill that would need to be there for the child in the first 2 or 3 years of his life. We will get into these specific areas in the next session. And today we will talk about the primary areas of development, learning and development. So you could make connections between this graph and the prime areas later on through the session. When we work with children, we should understand that development is not an automatic process. It doesn't happen in each child at the same time, at the same pace. It depends on each unique child's having own opportunities and abilities. And it also depends on the interaction process through the early stage in the child's life. So changes should be also understood not only in positive terms. Changes can actually have also negative character. What it means is that if the child is exposed to certain experiences, we talk about positive experiences. If the child is not exposed to experiences he should to, we talk about the negative experiences. So I will just give you an example here. In the graph, you will see 2 pictures of the brain. One is for healthy brain and one is for the damaged or underdeveloped brain. One brain on the left is for the child who had the emotional attachment and emotional bond with his mother in early years, and the brain on the right is for the child who was an orphan and he did not get sufficient emotional attachment, emotional experiences in his early years. So you can see the difference. And if you look at the circled areas, you will see the difference in color, but what it means in practice, that the black zones, they are experiencing negative experience. They are running through, they are having consequences or experiencing consequences of negative experiences, of lack of emotional attachment. So this brain of an orphan child on the right, it tends to, in the long run, it tends to actually suffer from many learning difficulties. Examples of this are understanding spoken language, selective attention, poor working and long-term memory, emotional disturbances. So you can see that experiences in early years, they really have very far-ranging and far-reaching effects. So this is, again, to emphasize that the child is born and the child is ready to learn. This is about us, adults, to understand it and to provide adequate treatment to the child. As I mentioned, children are eager to learn, ready to learn, and this is about the environment which supports the learning. So I give you an example. Some people may think that, oh, this child doesn't say a word, he is not able to speak yet. So why to bother? Why to think about his development? He is probably not developing at all, because people may mistakenly understand that development is something that is expressed in spoken language. So I would like to encourage you to think differently on this. Even though some functions are not in place, like speech or certain responses to instructions, it still means that the child is learning all the time. So right from the birth, the learning process is launched. And we have to be alert to this, and we have to understand that we should provide sufficient environment and sufficient support for the child to develop and learn.